start the proceedings. So welcome everybody to this year's Graduate School Information Session. We put it on about this time every fall, and our hope is that it's going to provide information that's helpful to students at multiple levels. So people who know nothing about graduate school are going to learn a lot about graduate school and application process tonight. People who are more informed are going to learn still about graduate school application. Um, so the first hour of this will be a faculty panel with the esteemed faculty who are present already, and each of them represents a different graduate training area at Duke, and that is, kind of broadly the case across many graduate programs. You're going to have the same kinds of training areas, maybe some additional ones too. And then we'll move into the second hour after a break. The faculty members will go away, and the graduate students will come, and then they will field questions from you. Panelists, thank you so much for being here. It would be great to start off if you could introduce yourselves, tell who you are, what graduate training area you're affiliated with, classes that you teach or taught at Duke, and then we can move into things that I think the next thing to ask about would be the kinds of programs that are available to do the kind of work that you do in your area. But if we could start, if you don't mind, looking across my screen, I see Dr. Hoyle first. If you could go first, that'd be great.
You're happy to do it. My name is Rick Hoyle. I belong to or identify most closely with the social psychology training area, though I am engaged in training of students from other areas. And I've been at Duke now 21 years, and in my own research, well, we can get into this more deeply in just a moment, but my own research focuses on self and identity, which is a major theme within the social psychology area.
Thank you. Dr. Wilbourn.
Okay, can you guys hear me? Okay, perfect. I am in the developmental area, and I already forgot the assignment. So the area we're in, I teach the survey developmental psychology course, and I also teach the honors or GWD thesis workshop, as well as a course called The Role of Race and Culture on Development, which is really focused primarily on the development of African American children in the United States. And my research looks at the relationship between gesture, thought, and language through a social cultural lens. And also, I'm getting into more identity and how language and identity and culture are all playing a role in sort of our cognitions and our social cognitions as well.
Thank you. Dr. Williams.
Hi, yes, I'm Emerita Professor Williams. I just recently retired after 30 years at Duke in the Department of Psychology and Neuroscience. And I'm sort of representing the area that's behavioral neuroscience and computational neuroscience, though I know a lot about a lot of the other areas of psychology as well. And so I'm happy to answer questions about all sorts of things vaguely neuroscience-y. I used to teach behavioral biobasis, the introduction to the biological basis of behavior, and courses in behavioral neuroendocrinology, and a course called Sex, Gender, Nature, Nurture, very interdisciplinary class at Duke.
Thanks. Dr. Strauman.
Hi there, I'm Tim Strauman. I'm a clinical psychologist by training. Some of the courses that I've taught are what used to be called abnormal psychology back when I taught it, and it has a much better name now. I think it's clinical and health psychology. I also teach some in the undergraduate statistics and methods courses, and do a lot of teaching at the graduate level as well, part of our training of doctoral level clinical psychologists.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Egner.
That leaves me. Hi, my name is Tobias Egner. I'm also a professor in the department, and I represent the cognition and the brain area. And in line with that, the courses I've taught in the past most typically include Introduction to Cognitive Neuroscience. I've also done a seminar on prefrontal cortex and cognitive control, and have taught both of the GWD classes, both in the psychology and the neuroscience domain.
Thanks. Well, if we could kind of go through the rotation again, but this time talk a little bit more about the kinds of programs, different kinds of programs that people who are interested in your area might consider if they're thinking about graduate school, because there are some choices to be made. And so last time we started with Dr. Hoyle. Dr. Hoyle?
Yeah. Uh, I'm not sure about programs, but I can tell you a bit about the variety of options within the social psychology area. We're a fairly tightly knit group, so students within the social area generally uh, meet together. We do colloquial brown bags together. The broad theme across social psychology at Duke, I would say, is self and identity. And this ranges from people who are studying social identity in terms of culture, multiculturalism, multiracialism, and those of us studying more uh, sort of self-related processes. It's worth noting that there are 5 of us within the department, and there are another half dozen or so social psychologists about Duke campus. There are 4 of them in the School of Business. And though they don't mentor our students as a primary mentor, they serve on many of our students' committees, and it provides an opportunity for students to get mentorship, potentially for job opportunities that would involve that arena. And even then, beyond the School of Business, there's social psychologists and sociology here and other places. So it's very easy to be within the broad domain of social psychology, quite interdisciplinary if you want to.
Okay. Dr. Wilbourn, about developmental.
So there are a couple different routes with developmental. So you have what we have in our department, which is quote unquote a traditional, where you have a psychology department that has a training area of developmental, which you then get scholars who study varieties of things. In our area, we have a cognitive sort of work, a little cognitive heavy in our developmental, which makes great collaborations. And we, sort of there's the mentor model where you sort of take a student and the student works in like an apprentice type model. But there are also applied developmental programs. So these are programs, sometimes they are housed in schools of education, sometimes they're housed in schools of family studies. So there are lots of different ways that you can get a degree or study developmental psychology. Sometimes it's in schools of ed. Sometimes they are applied and they can be in sort of their own school. Like, for example, when I went to Cornell, we were in the School of Human Development, and that was the only place you could really get a developmental psychology degree. And Yuri Bronfenbrenner was part of that. But there also was a psychology department that had a couple developmentalists there. So there are programs, there are HDFS, so Human Development Family Studies. So there's lots of different avenues. There's lots of master's programs in developmental as well. So there are research-based, there are more applied programs that actually get you in working in public schools or even public policy, implementing sort of, bilingual instruction in schools. And so if you're interested in looking at developmental issues, depending on what you want to study, there's usually lots of different routes, and don't get caught specifically in either the school or the department. It's more about the person who's doing the work you're interested in working on, and that's the sort of best route to go.
Thanks. Dr. Williams?
Yeah, so in the neuroscience area, there are also a number of different routes that students can take. Again, in our department, we have faculty within the psychology and neuroscience department itself. We have a program where there are 4 or 5 faculty members working in neuroscience, and my area is mostly people who are interested in studying mechanisms of how the brain actually works and produces behavior. So working mostly with animal models of brain function rather than with human beings. And I would say that, again, just as Makeba mentioned, it's important for students to find a person, a mentor, or several mentors in a school that you want to work with, and then determine what programs they're associated with. So in many cases, the programs are actually within a medical center itself. So Duke, for instance, has a neurobiology department, and Duke Medical Center has a neurobiology department, and you can apply to do graduate work within neurobiology itself. You can apply to our department and get a degree and work with a faculty member who does very similar kind of work to faculty in neurobiology. But there are also a lot of interdisciplinary programs or integrated programs in neuroscience these days that really cross over many departments and even many parts of a university. So an integrative program might have 20, 30, 40, 100 different faculty members who are associated with the program. And what students do is apply to the general integrated neuroscience program. And then you spend a year or two rotating from lab to lab and eventually finding a match, a mentor. It's kind of like a version of dating because both the mentor and the student have to both agree that they want to work together. And then you finish your degree within that department or program. And both of these are very different models. The model within sort of like a psych department is one that's more of a mentor. You apply to the department and you're pretty much matched up with someone that you'd really like to work with, and you start working with that individual right away. Whereas in these integrated programs, you're not committed. No one's committed to you, and you're not committed to anyone when you start the program. And so you have to be careful in those programs to make sure that there are faculty and individuals that you really, more than one, that you'd really like to work with, because the match may not work at the end of a couple of years. And you have to be sure that there's a good match between what you're interested in and the people within the individual programs.
Okay. Thanks. Dr. Strauman, I'm sure you have a lot to say about different programs for people who are interested in clinical applications.
Yeah, is it okay if I share my screen?
Sure.
Can somebody, let's see, set me up for that?
I
Share.
will do my best. I would do my best if I could do my best.
I should have given you a heads up. My apologies.
I'm not sure why I'm not seeing this. Oh, here. Okay.
There we go. Okay,
Good.
excellent. Much better. What am I looking for? Now it's on me. All right. So I'm just going to do this quickly because it raises a lot of issues and hopefully answers a lot of issues. Many people who go through psychology major consider the idea of becoming somebody who is a practitioner, a psychotherapist. Within psychology, there are three different ways to do that: clinical psychology and two kinds of doctoral degrees, PhD and PsyD, counseling psychology, and school psychology. There also are a number of other highly respected and well-established professions that lead to licensure that also equip people to provide psychotherapy, including things like social work, marriage and family therapy, psychiatric nursing, and psychiatry. So the first thing you want to do, if you're considering this as a career option, is figure out what you want and try to do it separately from considerations like prestige or income. What is it that you want to do? Do you want to function as a therapist? Are you interested in being a researcher or a teacher as well? Are you interested in mentoring? Do you care about policy? Do you care about administration, training the trainers, and running the systems that are involved in helping people? Okay. Clinical psychology programs per se are highly competitive, but they're not impossible. But you have to think of the process as long-term. And any of you ever talked to me individually about this, this is the spiel you get. I apologize, I'm going to give it to you again. Most people don't get in the first time. It's just ridiculously competitive. What you can do is make yourself highly qualified. Strong grades, GRE scores, to the extent that those are still relevant, strong and very thoughtful letters of recommendation, typically lots of research experience, presentations, publications, a master's degree. Nobody has all of these qualifications, but the most successful applicants have more of them. Also, the most successful applicants, to be perfectly honest, are a little bit older. So if you have two applicants who appear to be equally qualified and one is coming right out of undergraduate and one's had 5 years of work experience, the one with the 5 years of work experience is going to be have an advantage for a whole variety of reasons. So if this is what you want to do with your life, you have to be ready to dedicate your life to it, and you have to think about it as something that may take you several steps, several times. And the other thing I tell people is I had to apply to graduate schools 4 times before I ever even got an interview at one. So I sympathize with the long-term nature of it, but that in fact is exactly how things go. And I will stop sharing.
Thank you. Dr. Egner?
Hi, yeah. So, if you're interested in doing a PhD at Duke in sort of cognitive neuroscience, typically in sort of human neuroscience, like using non-invasive imaging, for example, then our area is sort of the one for you. The basic process and system is very similar to what's been described before, and I'm really glad that Dr. Williams described sort of two alternative kinds of programs, because there is a second program that's called the Cognitive Neuroscience Admitting Program, or CNAP, that we also offer at Duke that takes this more integrative approach. So there are two routes then in a way to apply. One is via directly to the psychology and neuroscience department to our area. And as was noted, this is more of a faculty-centric sort of program and review process. So if you are pretty certain about, hey, which faculty member does the kind of work that you're really interested in and excited about, then that could be a good route for you. And you would contact that person and you would put your application together and sort of fine-tune it a little bit towards targeting that particular person. But if you are a little bit more wide open still, you're really passionate about the research, but you're not sure exactly what specific topic you would like to pursue and who to work with, then the CNAP program might be a better choice for you, because there the admission is much more committee based, of a larger group of people review your dossier and come to a broad consensus on, who looks like a promising candidate for the program rather than for a particular faculty member. So, and as Dr. Williams pointed out, this program involves rotating through usually 3 different labs in your first year of the program to sort of figure out which lab you like best, what kind of style you like best. And oftentimes it actually leads to co-supervision across at least 2 labs, which is kind of part of the goal of the program also, that it's interdisciplinary in nature, and ideally you end up with 2 or more co-supervisors, and your work is sort of, creating perhaps a new niche, a new connection between different labs. And I'll leave it at there. Really excited to hear about your questions on the sort of admissions process and so forth.
So we can open this up to questions, I think, while we're allowing people the opportunity to kind of devise their questions or type them in the chat, though it might be helpful to hear what faculty are looking for in prospective applicants. What is it that makes you perk up when you see somebody's application? And we don't have to go in order here, just people could chime in as they wish. Sure.
Well, I think an overlap in interest is usually appreciated, right? You usually tend to want somebody who's passionate about the kinds of topics that you are passionate about, and in a way that goes without saying, but it's still important to note. If you are passionate about a particular topic, find the people that do research in that topic and apply to them and contact them, because that's sort of, I think, the most fundamental thing that excites us. Oh, this person is passionate about this too. But in terms of the background qualifications, a little bit as Dr. Strauman covered in his slides, research experience is of course very desirable, because for obvious reasons you can sort of start hitting the ground running a little bit if you already know some of the technical aspects of a particular area. but also because it speaks to you understanding kind of what it takes. Because another concern sometimes is that, especially with students coming straight from undergrad, that they think they're passionate about research, but they might not really understand what it's like to do that sort of 9 to 5, 5 days a week, and so on and so forth. So that's another reason why we really value research experience quite highly. And a lot of students do post-bac research before applying to graduate school in order to kind of get more experience, but also maybe to figure out whether this is really for them to be like a full-time researcher, and that is the career that they're passionate about.
Yeah, I'd like to sort of second what Tobias said. I do really think that it's important to figure out what you're interested in before applying to graduate school. It's really a key thing that faculty look for, is that you're not just saying, I'm interested in social psychology, or I'm interested in developmental psychology, or I'm interested in all things having to do with the brain. That's really too broad at the level of applying to graduate school, because what you're going to be doing in graduate school is narrowing your focus to a particular question or topic that really excites you, and finding like-minded people who are also working on the same area, topic, types of questions. And the place to sort of indicate this is in your personal statement. And I just wanted to emphasize a couple of things about the personal statement, which is it's not like the personal statement that you wrote for college. This is a statement more like the kind of statement you would write if you were applying for a job, meaning you want to indicate what your credentials are, what experiences you've had, why you're particularly interested in a particular topic, why you think research and getting a PhD or a master's degree is the right direction for you. These are the things that faculty are interested in hearing about from you. And they're not particularly interested in hearing about necessarily about your family background, or about your hobbies, or about your extracurricular activities. These are wonderful things to have done in college, but these are not the kinds of things that belong in the statement that you write for graduate school. Think of it as applying for a job where you want to indicate why you were a good fit for this particular program, these particular faculty members. And so that's kind of a really strong and important thing. When we get personal statements that are all about people's hobbies and experiences they had in their childhood and stuff, it doesn't, you don't come across as a serious applicant for graduate school.
Dr. Wilbourn, I think you had some things to contribute, and then we'll go to some comments in the chat.
Yeah, no, I'm always excited to hear from my colleagues. One of the things that I want to emphasize is that the strategy that you used to pick an undergrad is not the same strategy you used for grad school. So undergrad, you wanted to go to the best school you could, right? That was the strategy in terms of often rankings or any kind of external measure. Grad school, what we want to see is that when you're applying, are you applying to people that are in the area, or you are knowledgeable about the research topic or area such that you are applying to people who are known in that area? So, for example, if you apply to let's say if you had applied to work with me and you wanted to study gesture, and then I look at the other schools you say you apply to, and you have schools on there that I know doesn't have anyone that's doing gesture, but they're Penn and Yale or whatever, then I know that you're using a strategy that is about sort of rankings. But if you are really interested in early word learning and you're applying to me and Roberta Golenkopf, who's at the University of Delaware, and you're applying, right? Now I know that you know the field, you know the area, and you're applying to people based on the research, as opposed to solely based on these external sort of metrics. So fit is really important, and you're applying to a person or a group of people or a program that offers you the type of research experience that you're interested in, as opposed to, I just want to get into Duke. And that's something we can really clearly tell. Your personal statement tells us that, but also looking at your strategies on if you are actually a good fit, then you should be able to say at least one faculty member and maybe even another faculty member who would be good mentors for you. And I also recommend trying to do two people. It also gives you a better chance because that person may be going on a sabbatic. That person may be, slated to retire in 2 years. And you may not know that. But if you show that you're a good fit with at least a couple people in the department, then you are more appealing because you have other avenues of being mentored than as opposed to just one person, or if you're just applying to a department because they're ranked top 10 and whatever.
Thanks. If we could go to a couple of the questions in the chat. One is basically, if you're sure about what you want to do, is there any way, and you want to go right from undergrad to grad, is there a way to kind of compensate for a lack of post-bac research experience?
I could say a little bit from my own perspective. I think I would hope a student would just address that straight on in their personal statement. I mean, they're going to be competing against people who've done post-bacs and who potentially have master's degrees or have been working for some number of years. So just a recognition that you're suggesting that you're ready to go without those things, and here's why. And potentially even conveying that to at least one of your letter writers, your recommenders, so that he or she can comment on maybe beyond what they might ordinarily comment on how they believe you're ready to go and don't necessarily need a post-bac or a master's degree.
There's sorry, please.
No, I wanted to weigh in on this. Think about it as like if you were being recruited for a sport, right? And what happens with the PhD program, because they're most often, and you should be only applying to ones that are fully funded to where you're not paying to go to school, you get a stipend, is that they're trying to bank on who you're going to be 5 years from now. And a lot of people who especially come from really competitive, high achieving environments have the mindset of like, well, I said I was going to go to grad school when I was a freshman, so I'm going to do it without a lot of that time to reflect and decide if they really want to. So what happens is the reason why some schools and some programs are a little gun shy with straight out is that often by the third year, they now want to, open a coffee shop and they don't really want this. So your research experience is going to be really important in offsetting any type of concern about coming straight out. And then the maturity in which you talk about why you want to do this, like that you've thought about this, you're interested in this work, as opposed to statements, and all of my colleagues will nod their head, where it's sort of like, I'm just listing all the qualifications I have, like, please let me in, I'm good enough, as opposed to a really coherent, this is why I want to do, this is important, this is why I want to do, this is what I plan to do, and that you've thought about it. So if you can't take a gap or post-bac, showing that you've done some research in a lab, but also other aspects. Are you going to the colloquia? Are you going to brown bag talks? Are you showing a higher level of engagement above and beyond just coursework? That's a way you can maybe offset some of it, but the maturity and the sort of being able to have perspective is usually why most programs prefer someone who's been out or at least has done maybe a lab or research position as a lab coordinator or a research assistant, even if it's not specifically in the area you want. Sometimes that can also give people a little bit more confidence that this person really knows and has done some of the challenging of their ideas and reaffirm that this is the direction they want to go. But if you don't want to do that, having really rich research experiences where you show that you go above and beyond and engaging in more professional activities like going to a conference, for example, is, I think, essential to override that concern that some departments and faculty might have about someone straight through.
Yeah, can I just say one more thing? I want to echo what Makeba just said, but Victoria asked this question, and I have taken over the years a number of students who are coming straight out of their undergraduate and have taken them into my lab. And I must admit that the reason why these particular students stood out to me was they did go above and beyond. One of them in particular, pretty much every summer applied to various programs so that they could do full-time research over the summer in different labs, not at their own university, but at other universities. I was really impressed by letters of recommendation that came from faculty from other institutions, not their home institution, that indicated that this is a person who sought out research opportunities that were above and beyond the kinds of things that they could get even at their undergraduate institution. Almost all of them have done senior theses where they did year-long projects under the mentorship. Many of them got involved in research starting earlier in their college career, not just in their senior year. And so I think looking for those kinds of things, as well as for other qualities, students who had really strong quantitative backgrounds, students who had taken more than one statistics class, for instance, students who actually had done some laboratory research within coursework and talked about that within their applications. So those kinds of things really stand out for our students who are coming straight out of undergraduate.
Thanks. I think it makes sense to segue to the third question, and then we'll swing back for the second one, because the third one is kind of getting at a similar idea, which is what else can you do aside from research to kind of prepare you? Are there jobs that you could take on that would help with this, and where do you find them? What kinds of things would that involve?
Well, I think Makeba mentioned, oh, sorry, go ahead,
Go
Tobias.
ahead. I think that's kind of tough because what people are looking for is research experience. So unless the job that you're doing is really directly related to research, I think it'll be tough to dress it up as more relevant than research in your application. There might be one exception, which perhaps Tim Strauman can speak to, in that perhaps if your job is in kind of like a clinical care setting, that might still, carry value for applying to a clinical program, even if it wasn't directly sort of research related. But for most of the PhD programs, it has to be research. It doesn't have to be academic research. So you could work for a company that is doing research, but research is the key, I would say.
Yeah, and you can find these kinds of positions by, again, finding faculty members who might be recruiting a research tech for their lab or a lab coordinator for their lab. The other place to write directly to people. I mean, I've advised a number of students over the years to just be bold and compose an email message that tells a little bit, include their resume and explain what they're looking for, indicate their availability to be interviewed, and all of them have gotten positions in various cities around the country. And the second thing is that the National Institute of Health has a number of post-bac positions you can apply for. I always forget the name of it. Do one of you remember the name of the program?
IRTA, Intramural Research Training.
Right, there's an IRTA program, and you can apply to the IRTA program, and some faculty member at NIH will pick you up. There's research being done in the Bethesda labs at NIH, all kinds of different kinds of research. And that's another great opportunity to find a position.
If we could swing back, I think, Dr. Strauman, this is for you. Can you just distinguish between an MA program in clinical and a PhD program, and why there are these tracks?
Sure. This used to be very clear cut. It used to be the case that in order to be independently licensed in psychology, you had to have a doctorate degree. Unfortunately, there were never nearly enough people who did to come anywhere close to meeting the mental health needs of our country or around the world. And so psychology as a profession, as a guild, sort of was dragged kicking and screaming into saying, we probably need to create people who are capable and properly trained to do that kind of work at the master's level, which of course was already happening in a lot of other professions. So it is just now beginning to percolate. It's probably a little too soon to get onto that bandwagon because the rate limiting factor is not whether you have a master's degree from a good program, it's whether the state that you're going to be working in will allow you to be independently licensed with a master's degree. So, for example, the state of North Carolina has something called a psychological associate, which is a semi-independent status, but you still have to be getting a certain amount of supervision and so on. And it's a perfectly good thing. It's just not 100% independent. But this is going to be something that's going to change very quickly, and it's driven by the overwhelming need for mental health services. So, keep an eye on that. Otherwise, as things are today, master's programs in psychology would not necessarily prepare anyone for independent practice or licensure, although they can be fabulous stepping stones to not just clinical psychology, but all the other areas of psychology. Think about clinical psychology as, first and foremost, you're a behavioral scientist. What you are is a behavioral scientist who does a particular kind of work and uses the knowledge that they've gained in behavioral science and more recently cognitive neuroscience to work with people who have different kinds of mental or physical health problems, enhance well-being, et cetera, et cetera. But you're a psychologist first and a clinical psychologist on top of that. And that's why the training is so demanding. And that's why it's so competitive, because it's actually just a very difficult and challenging set of, it's 5 or 6 years worth of work. Anyway, I'll stop there.
Okay, thanks.
Can I weigh in? A lot of students, and Tim, if you agree, I think that because of the needs in our country, we're seeing a lot more masters in social work. So social workers can practice and they do get licensed. And so this is another path that I've often advised students who maybe wanted to help people, but the idea of a clinical psychology program, and I told them it's harder to get into a clinical psych than med school. Like it's that competitive. They get what? I don't know. We get like 300 or 400 some odd applications, Tim. I might be low, 500 applications. And we take what, like 6? Something like that. The yield's really low. So think about not only just a master's, maybe, marriage and family, but also a master's in social work is getting a lot of people that opportunity. And there's some great programs that really help prepare you for either your own practice or actually working in some kind of, now there's social workers who are going with police when they get domestic calls, or if there's someone who's disabled or having a psychotic break, having social workers go is now up the need for us to have those types of mental health providers too. So there's other routes, not just solely like Dr. Strauman was saying, but a master's in social work seems to be an easier middle ground because you can get a license and you can practice. And please weigh in if I'm inaccurate in any way, Tim.
That is 100% right. There is no evidence that a doctoral level therapist on average is any better than a master's level therapist, which is absolutely remarkable, but it's true. We know that for a fact. It's the quality of the therapist. It's the quality of the training. It's the dedication of the person. It's not the degree. So yes, keep that in mind.
If we could go to a new question here in the chat, which is, if you've done research in an area that is different from the area you were hoping to go into, I mean, is that a problem?
Well, yeah, that's Maddie's question, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it is, it is of course helpful if your research experience is in fact in the area that you want to apply to. That's typically the way it goes, that your undergraduate, your thesis research, for example, really piqued your interest in a particular area and you developed some expertise and you want to dig deeper into this and maybe even apply to folks that you have, cited in your thesis work and read their papers. And so that would be the more typical route. But it's not impossible to switch if you will. So it's certainly better to have in-depth research experience in some field in psychology and apply even to a different program than it would be to have no research experience. But in that case, where you're sort of switching fields, if you were, you would really have to make a good case for this in your personal statement again, to really explain like, oh, I got into this because, this is how it happened in my undergraduate career. I went to this kind of lab and then that, and I really enjoyed it. And I learned all these skills. But my real interest is, X because, and then you have to really have a nice motivation for this. And maybe also point out why the skills that you acquired in the clinical psychology thesis in your example there are in fact relevant to the social psychology program and the topic that you're applying to. And usually those connections are not too hard to make. And you might end up like, writing a quite impressive statement by linking these things together. This actually briefly circle back to the earlier question about going straight from undergrad to a PhD program, because you can turn that to your advantage, right? If you have a statement that it oozes kind of maturity and that you have really thought deeply about the topic that you're interested in and so forth. And I read this and I'm like, oh, wow, this student, she's straight from undergrad and she's already, produces this. Then it's actually suddenly an advantage, right? Because I'm like, oh, wow, she didn't even have those 2 extra years of postbac, but has really thought deeply about it. And suddenly I'm like much more excited about that undergrad, straight from undergrad applicant than the person who has done postbac research. So you can turn that around if you put a really good statement together that reflects, some deep thinking about the research topic that you're really interested in.
I wonder if you all would be comfortable, this is kind of taking a pivot, but talking about scores that are optional and whether people should bother preparing for and taking tests, GRE and whatnot.
That's a real tough one, Angie.
Mhm.
I mean, I don't think it. I think most Duke students have scored well on these kinds of tests, and so I think for the students in the audience here, I generally think you're probably going to score well on the GREs because you're bright, smart Duke students, and your scores will probably be good, and certainly won't harm you in terms of getting into graduate school. But I also want to point out that I think we faculty look a lot at what courses you've taken. We look a lot at your transcript rather than just your scores. And so we're really interested in the choices that you've made in terms of the courses that you've chosen to take, particularly in your last couple of years of college, because they tell us something about what skills you have, kind of how rigorous your program of study has been, how focused your program of study has been. Have you kind of honed in on particular areas of psychology or fleshed out your experiences with some additional information? I mean, again, I keep mentioning quantitative kinds of things, but programming, being able to program, being able to do data analysis. These are important pretty much for every PhD program, every area of psychology. And so students who make good choices about these other kinds of things that they are choosing on their transcript always impresses us a great deal. And it's kind of irrelevant if students are getting A pluses in those courses, or they're getting A minuses in those courses, or even B pluses in those courses. What we want to see is that students are choosing, courses that will add to their background and experiences of the kinds of things they'll need when they go to graduate school.
Rick, were unmuted. Did you want to weigh in on that?
Well, I would just, thinking at the end of the day, what we're doing when we're evaluating applications is comparing applicants. And, it's helpful to have some sort of a semi-objective metric on which to compare people. It gets very difficult when it's all subjective and people went to different universities, so you don't know whether GPAs are comparable across institutions. And that's the sort of thing, by the way, a statement can clarify if you're at a place where like, for example, the College of William and Mary is notorious for being anti-grade inflation. So you can say my 3.5 is as good as a 3.8 elsewhere. But we used to think the GRE was useful simply because everybody took the same theoretically objective tests. And we now know there's certain biases in that test, and that's partly why it's no longer required by many institutions. But if it's a favorable score, I say put it in. And these days we look at it in the list of things we look at, sort of fourth or fifth in the list, after the statement, after coursework, after letters.
I have probably a little bit more of I guess maybe a controversial view. So the GRE is supposed to predict first year grades in grad school. But the reality is that no one actually cares about grades in grad school the first year. Your first year is really about establishing, working with your mentor and your research. So here's the thing. If you have this great score, that's awesome. It's just another piece that can help you. But if you are trying to determine whether you should spend money, because a lot of these classes, I know that, when I was trying to go to grad school, you had to take the GRE, and it was like $1,500 just to take a prep course back then. And that was like, eons ago. So I can't even imagine how much it is now. Personally, I would rather have students really spend a lot of their time having really rich research experiences and having letter writers who can really talk about who you are, your abilities, as opposed to focusing mostly on something that, depending on the school, they may weigh it more or less heavily. Personally, I didn't want to go to a school that put a lot of emphasis on a GRE score, because those schools often are notorious for this sort of they expect you to be really autonomous. It's really like, well, you have this high analytical score, you have these high whatever scores, you should be able to come in and we'll just kind of give you resources and you can do it on your own, as opposed to mentoring the whole student, which our department mentors the whole student. So I think it's really a trade-off depending on how well you take tests and what it's going to cost you to be able to give yourself the best opportunity to get a great score. The problem is people are only going to submit if they have the top scores, which is skewing it. We're seeing the same thing with the SAT. So if you aren't scoring in the top, it can hurt you if you include it, because now it's going to be pit against someone who likely submitted it because they were darn near perfect. So this is the risky trade-off that I would much rather have you have richer other things that we can assess your analytical, having your letter writers talk about your analytical skills, your writing, your stat skills, and your classwork, and that, as opposed to spending a lot of money and time on a score that may actually hurt you if you're not able to score in the top range.
Thanks for addressing that. We have another question. Nairobi, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. So someone who's interested in clinical psychology, wondering how to compensate for not having extensive research experience when applying to grad school. What kinds of jobs or departments would be recommended to strengthen an application, like experience in those things afterwards?
Well, there are a couple of things. One is it's never too late to get some exposure to research. That can always be done. It can be done on a volunteer basis. It doesn't have to be something that results in a thesis or a formal product. It's great when that happens, but it certainly doesn't have to. Once you get out, I think that the question about what you want your next activity to be, assuming you have to go out and make some money, is what kind of program do you see yourself applying to? What do you see yourself doing professionally? So if you're going to be a clinical psychologist, you're going to have to get a PhD, which means you're going to have to do research, which means all of the things that people have been saying hold. However, there is a broad range of different kinds of programs. So Duke's clinical psychology program is very research heavy. Others are not. And so it may be that the only sort of in-depth research experience you have while you're there is working on your own dissertation. Um, so depending on where it is that you see yourself going professionally, um, there are different kinds of experiences, human services jobs, for example, different kinds of jobs in education, different kinds of jobs in the nonprofit sector that if your concern is not to go out and get research experience, clinical and counseling and school psychology programs would consider to be relevant. Um, but that's sort of an individual judgment that you have to make. So ideally, you want to be able to say, I've done something in the research world. I know I'm not allergic to it, so that if I'm going to a PhD program, I know I'm going to be able to do it. I also am not allergic to working with other human beings. So I've had some experience that's told me that I like being in a service capacity. I enjoy scholarship. I enjoy finding an interesting question in the literature and digging at it and finding out what is it that we actually know about it and who's doing the best work on that topic. Those are all things that I think will be applicable across the board. And then it's going to be a matter of, I think Makeba was talking about this before, is, what is the specific program you're going to apply to? Who do you want to work with? Who do you want to serve as your mentor? That's one of the most important decisions you'll make will be if you're going on in a PhD, who should your mentor be?
Master's programs are also a good place to get additional coursework and research. So there are some great terminal MA programs where you can go, and I did a master's before I went into a PhD, and I got a ton of really incredible research experience. So it's more money. Often it's not paid for. You may have to take out loans. And so there's a negative there, but there's another place where you can get some research experience. And social work programs, for example, don't require the same amount of research experience. Social work programs, especially our Duke students, do really well getting into some of the top social work programs in the country because they don't have this same sort of requirement for as much research experience. So all experience is, I think, good experience in many ways if you are trying, because it all helps sort of get you to the path of where you ultimately want to be. So I would pursue lots of different things, reach out to different places. So, looking at different schools and reaching out to PIs and saying, I would love to volunteer or do work, or do you happen to have a position, a research assistant position? It doesn't hurt to ask, and you can always get no answer, but they can always, sort of tell you what specific things they might be looking for. And then you're adding that to your knowledge base as well.
Nairobi, it looks like you have a follow-up.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you. Thank you for the insight, everyone. An additional question. How often is it you guys get reached out by like others that are interested in your program or interested in you as a mentor or an advisor potentially that don't go to Duke? Because I was thinking about like reaching out to mentors in the schools that I'm interested in to like to know more about their research and things like that. How does that look? Or even looking at reaching out for like research opportunities.
All the time, I think is the answer. So the vast majority of emails I get is from students and at other schools that just happen to, have come across the research and are interested in it. Maybe their undergraduate mentor recommended, me as or somebody that they might want to contact or consider. So that is basically the model. In fact, it's relatively rare that a Duke undergrad would do their PhD at Duke. That happens, but it's more like an exception, really. You would probably apply to 5 or 6 programs where somebody that you might be interested in. So yeah, it's totally very common. You would want to email the person that you're interested in, and that's equally the case for inquiring about a PhD program as well as for a research position. Because at least and this certainly applies to my areas of cognitive neuroscience, or probably to most of the other areas. It's very common that you do finish your undergrad and then you work for a couple of years as a lab manager, research assistant, lab tech, whatever you want to call that, full time in a lab, and that could be anywhere in the country. Really, you can. There's a variety of sources for advertisements for these kinds of positions you could find, and yeah, I have plenty of previous undergraduate researchers from Duke who then ended up, doing that kind of position at currently the last one from last year, she's in a lab at Penn right now, for example, and then I assume that next year she'll apply for a PhD somewhere else. It's sort of part of the journey. You're not expected to stick around in one place.
Well, we are running into the last few minutes of our faculty panel, and Dr. Williams actually made a special request to kind of address an important aspect of application, which is letters of recommendation. So a few minutes on that would be really helpful.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that one of the important parts of an application to any of these programs are the letters of recommendation. And I don't think that students realize exactly how important they are. And while you're an undergraduate or while you're working in a post-bac position, it's really important for you to get to know your mentors and to let them know that you're interested in eventually applying to a PhD program, and telling them about why you're interested and seeking their advice, maybe taking them out and flunching them if you can do that at Duke, or just inviting them for a cup of coffee someplace and talking to them, because the letters of recommendation can't just say this was a good student in my class. We can see that with your A grade on your transcript. They have to say something about who you are, why you'd be a great person to take into your lab, to have as a mentee, to be a researcher, to know something about your skills, but also about your stick-to-itiveness, your ability to come up with good questions, your ability to like figure out a problem in the lab or try to understand a different way of looking at something. These are the kinds of things that we want to know about a potential applicant. And unless you are telling your mentors and the people that you're working with about yourself and about the kinds of things that you're thinking about, if you're just being a quiet little mouse in the corner doing your work, your mentor will never get to know you well enough to write you a really good letter of recommendation. And I just want to point out that really you have this great opportunity. There's so many wonderful faculty members, and it's part of our job to write recommendations. I mean, you're not imposing on us. We expect it to be asked. And but we also expect not to have a student walk into our office who we haven't seen for a couple of years and say, could you write me a letter of recommendation? Because what are we going to say about you? So it's really important to try to think about the fact that you're going to need letters of recommendation and cultivate some relationships and some understanding with faculty here, and also once you leave Duke, and if you're doing a couple of post-bac years, to get to know several people.
Just everybody understands that's the way the world works. We all did it. We all appreciate it. We all understand it. It's part of our role as faculty members. And so don't be shy. Everybody knows, that applying to graduate school is challenging and that this is part of it. And 99 times out of 100, you're going to reach out to a faculty member and they're going to be very gracious and say, sure, I was in your position once and I'm happy to help.
Well, thank you, faculty panelists, for sharing your time tonight and answering questions. And I would like to ask a blanket statement. Are you okay being contacted with additional questions in the future?
Yes, sure.
Thank you so much. Have a good night. So everyone else, we're going to be transitioning to the graduate student panel, and I think we'll give it like a couple minutes of dead air. Um, Although I think we're waiting for one more panelist to appear. So if you want to take a break, get a drink of water for the next couple of minutes, and then we'll come back and start that panel. Thanks. All right, I think we're ready to get rolling. I'll know when the grad panelists have appeared. Thank you for being willing to take part in tonight's panel. As you know, we just heard from faculty panelists, and there might be different kinds of questions that students would ask of you, being that you are much closer to the process of actually applying to graduate school successfully. And remember the decisions that you were faced with and when it was the right time. And so there's all kinds of questions that I think people could, benefit from hearing your perspective on. If we could start though by your introducing yourself, basically your name, the area that of research that you're in, kind of how long you've been in grad school, and then maybe a little bit about your trajectory, like how it is that you ended up here, so that we can see what your path looked like, and then we can start in on questions. Elida, do you mind starting off?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Elida. I'm in the social psych area, and I am a fourth year PhD student, although this is my second year at Duke. I don't know if people are interested in hearing about this, but basically the path to that was my advisor in my second year of my PhD in my previous institution at NYU decided to take a job at Duke, so we kind of moved together. Um, and in terms of how I ended up, I guess, pursuing a PhD, because I want to remain in academia after I get my PhD, probably at an R1 institution, so doing research mostly. And I also went straight in from undergrad. If people have any questions about that, like the pros and cons of doing that, I'm happy to talk about it as well. And for me, I guess it was mainly because I started doing research very early on in undergrad and I really, really enjoyed it. And I kind of knew that that was what I wanted to do. So for me, I was just like, let me try getting into a PhD program straight from undergrad because I was like, I have enough experience to kind of get the ball rolling. So yeah.
Thanks. Paul?
Hey guys, could you hear me, Angie?
Yes.
Cool, great. Pleasure to meet you guys. I'm a fourth year PhD student here at Duke. I'm in cognitive neuroscience, but it's a bit misleading because I really study like moral decision making and judgment, and I do a little bit of the brain, but it's much more moral and social focused. And also have a master's in data science from here at Duke too, so I could talk about kind of that as well. My trajectory is probably vastly different than most, if not all of you, but I'll throw it out there just to kind of highlight that there is no one linear or correct or best path to grad school or career. So I was a super terrible student, grew up super poor, got expelled from my first two high schools, graduated my third by the skin of my teeth. Needed two hands to count the times I was arrested before I was 18. Ended up going to the Marine Corps for 5 years, and then used my GI Bill to do undergrad. First gen college students who didn't really know what to expect, but somehow survived that, and then went straight to here at Duke after undergrad. So it's not the traditional kind of path, but I'm happy to chat with anyone that feels like maybe they had some kind of, obstacles or something up to this point as well.
Thanks. Madison?
Hey guys, my name is Madison. I'm a first year CNAP student, so that's the Cognitive Neuroscience Admitting Program. I originally was going to apply to go in right after undergrad, so that meant like the summer before my senior year, I'd reached out to faculty, had drafted my essays, etc. But halfway through the fall semester, I had gotten back-to-back concussions, and I was like, I am not ready for this. I need another year. So I ended up doing a 4+1 instead in quantitative psych. And this really like worked for me because it gave me time to seek out a PI for my master's thesis that was more closely aligned with what I wanted to do in grad school, and just like having more on my CV in general. Um, I applied to 6 or 7 schools. I do research in decision making, so that meant that I was applying to neuroscience programs, psychology departments, and like the cognition and brain area, and business schools, because some of business schools do decision making research. And I ended up at Duke. So yeah.
Thanks. Cleo?
Hello, Cleo, or it's the Chen I go by either. So I am in SINS, which is the System and Integrative Neuroscience program or division of PNN. I now actually work in a neurobiology departmental lab with animals. So my trajectory undergrad, I worked with rodents, so mice and rats, and then I knew for sure I don't want to work with humans. So going in knowing that I only applying programs for neurobiology and like animal neuroscience research, had a big interest in behavior. So that's like sort of been the path I've been working on. And yes, after undergrad, just straight off coming to grad school, I'm now a third year. It's kind of scary to think about that. Have my prelim scheduled in a couple of months. Guess the other things trajectory wise is I actually first got directly admitted in another lab that I'm not currently working in right now, and then things didn't work out, so now I sort of transferred lab in almost the end of my second year, and it worked out pretty fine. So far, so good. So yeah, that's me.
So can I ask really quickly before we move on to other topics, how many of you have more than one mentor that you're working with? Okay. And so I know that Dr. Strauman mentioned this and other faculty at the faculty panel, but it is nice if you have a couple people identified at the programs that you apply to that are potential work partners on research. So, okay, well, thanks for those introductions. I don't see any new questions yet in the chat, but if you don't mind kind of talking about maybe how you knew you were ready to apply to grad school might be of interest to our people in attendance. And you can just chime in as you wish.
Yeah, so maybe I have some thoughts on that. I don't know if there's ever like a specific or optimal place you could be in before you apply for grad school. Certainly, waiting to get some experience could be good, but waiting indefinitely until you're like 100% confident that you're like the best researcher ever is like defeats the point of grad school. Like you're meant to still grow and learn and develop as a person, but also as like an independent adult and scholar. But that being said, like definitely it's a commitment, and it's a big chunk of your life and time, and it's great. But like anything, it has its days that aren't so great too. And so I think it's important to know that you like doing research, if you're going to apply to grad school, at least if it's a research intensive grad program. There's certainly grad programs that are less emphasis on research and more coursework and stuff. I don't know what the whole scope of tonight was, but I heard something about like master's programs and social work and stuff like that. So just a pretty strong sense that you're actually interested in what you're going to apply for, and not just because you feel like it's the right thing or the next step and you're kind of trying to avoid entering the real world, so to speak, or you just think that that's expected of you. I think that's not a great reason to go to grad school. You should like have reached a point where internally it kind of feels like the right thing for you, and there may be some outside pressure, but there should be an overwhelming kind of internal motivation to do so. And other than that, it depends on what you want to do, but getting the research experience, being competitive enough. So if your grades in undergrad weren't super good, then maybe doing a master's program or something to kind of supplement that and show that you've grown or developed will put you in a better place to kind of apply. And I don't know, there's no like concrete milestone, I guess, what I'm trying to say. It's going to look a little bit different for everybody. I'm not sure if that's helpful or not.
Oh, I think it's great. Does anyone have anything to add, other comments?
I can also chime in. I think when I was applying for grad school, I knew for sure I wanted to do research because researching undergrad is different than nowadays to think about it as a grad student, but I know I don't want to go to med school. I did not want to go to like industry immediately. I really enjoyed research so far, so I was pretty certain that is the path I want to be on. But I think the other thing was that I think that helps me reduce the stress of the application season a lot is that because I'm certain I want to go for this, I'm gonna apply, try my best, and then I have a very solid backup plan that okay, if I don't get in, I want to find like a research tech job or a lab technician job to get more experience, and I can better prepare myself for next round. Then, once you're off college, like, age doesn't matter that much. Like there's people in grad school at different stages of life, and it's I guess that's something at that point I was telling myself is like you don't have to follow the step of everyone else. Try your best and just always have a plan to fall back on.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think for me, it was the realization that there was nothing else I wanted to do, besides like I wanted to get this PhD. It wasn't a backup or an option. Like it was something that I had really wanted, and I didn't have interest in anything else. And I debated the utility of getting like RA experience, like a post-bac or something. But I really wanted to go to school and learn. And I had a lot of previous research experience, so I didn't feel it was necessary for me to need a post-bac. But yeah, so that's why I knew like I was ready for a PhD.
Great. Well, thanks for addressing that. I wonder, um, what did what did you consider kind of look for? Again, people, please feel free to raise your hand or put a question in the chat. But until we see some comments, I'm wondering, like, what were you looking for in a graduate program? What were you looking for in a mentor? And I see Nairobi just raised her hand, but if you could address this question, then we'll get to that one really quickly. So what were you looking for in a program? What drew you to a program?
I can start. So for me, I don't know how it would be different across different fields of psych, but with social, like it's really important that you find a good research fit with the mentor that you're going to be working with. So like for me, it wasn't even necessarily the programs that I was looking at, but mainly I was just, going to faculty websites, scrolling down, trying to see if there's anyone who like does the type of research that I do. And on top of that, I think this is like another step that helped me is like, what have they been doing recently? And if I'm like really interested, because like, labs evolve, like even though they have like the same like broad questions they're looking at, sometimes they can move from one direction to the other, right? So like I was like, oh, like can I find at least like a couple of papers recently published from this lab that like are very intriguing to me, and it would be something that I would love to work on, do follow-ups on, or like is there enough like of a match? And I feel like that was kind of how I was like going through and like creating my list. And I think this like kind of goes back to something that Angie was mentioning earlier, but not just finding like one person that is like a good match, but also finding at least like one more or like two more people where, if you start working with someone, it doesn't work out. Like you could have like a backup plan, you can work with someone else, or you can do collaborations with, right? And like I mentioned earlier, I moved institutions, right? But I technically didn't have to move institutions. I could have stayed at my original institution and like, started working with someone else, right? Like it's always good to have like at least a couple of people that you have good research fits with, and then go from there, I think. And yeah, there have been times I also been to like websites where I'd be like, oh, this person, like there's no one in this department doing the type of work I want to do. So that I was just like, okay, move on to the next one, kind of.
Yeah. Anyone else have a comment?
Yeah, I think there's an imperfect hierarchy of things that you need to consider when you look for, let's just assume that it's a PhD, as opposed to a different grad school kind of thing. One is like she just mentioned, like fit, like the research fit. Like, is there someone? I guess it depends. If there's some neuroscience programs, like you apply to like the program and not a specific person, you have to rotate. So in that case, if it's like a rotation thing, are there 2 or 3 people in this department or area that I'd be happy to work with or I could learn from or something like that? But if it's the more traditional route where you get like directly admitted to someone's or maybe 2 people's labs, you want to make sure that the person, does the research that you're interested in, because this is a long haul. It's like 4 to 6 years is quite a bit of time to commit to something. And if you're not interested in it, I mean, interests change. And so that's totally fine if while you're there, things kind of shift a little bit, but you should be initially really excited. about kind of the stuff you will be doing, and not just like, I'll suck it up and do this just so I could be at this lab or this school. Like that's a terrible thing. You may be able to survive and get through it, but you won't enjoy your time. So that's the most important for like just your internal, your like well-being. And for better or for worse, for career prospects, where you go to school or who you get your PhD under is also super important. And so you should prioritize research fit. But it is important to think about, kind of how well known a school is. I know that kind of sounds crappy to think about, but it does matter. And maybe that's an issue, but it's an issue that you'd be silly to kind of overlook while you're doing this. Like you could acknowledge something is wrong, but still kind of have to, look out for yourself. So kind of the caliber of the person that you're working with and the school and the reputation, and it's not always cut and dry. Like it's not like Duke is better than every other school or something like that. Like if you're studying, for example, I don't know, human AI interaction, it may be that Colorado State University has like the best program for that. And everyone knows in the world that like the best researchers that do human AI interaction are at Colorado State University. So in which case, if that's like your interest and that's the career you want to pursue, then it would behoove you to go to a place like that over a place like maybe Stanford that has, this overarching like higher prestige factor, whatever that means. So it's not always super easy or not so obvious what school is like the best fit, but it's worth kind of trying to look at and see like, okay, this person has a great reputation. This school has a great reputation on this. And then there's some other things like, because it's a 4 to 6 year thing, you could suck it up and live somewhere you hate, like in Alaska, like Nome, Alaska. But if you know yourself and know that you're just going to be miserable, then geography ought to play some factor too. Like you should know yourself and know what you're willing to kind of to deal with, or, where you thrive and where you're just going to be struggling to get through. So there may be certain places in the country, let's just assume again, you could go elsewhere, different countries, but assume it's within this country. There may just be geographical regions that you are kind of prefer to avoid, whether it's because you want to be close to family or, some areas just don't vibe with your values or whatever, the geography, the weather sucks. So that's important, but those should kind of fall maybe after research fit primarily, and then kind of how well this place will set you up for success. And then, if you could have your cake and eat it, you choose the best research fit at the best school in the world and like your preferred geography and weather and stuff like that. But those are some things you ought to do. And it's also worth reaching out to, if you find some people, like reach out to these PIs, email them, see if you could talk to them before. They may not because they're busy or they want to be fair. They don't want to have a bias, they don't want to have a bias for applications, which is totally reasonable. They may talk to you and you may get a sense for what they're like. And so, the person could have a great research program and be really well known, but not be great to work with. And only you kind of know the style of mentorship that you want. Some people like to be kind of more closely watched. Some people like to be more free without a leash, so to speak. So either asking the person what their mentorship style is, or asking people in their lab, like current grad students or people that graduate, kind of what their experience was, will let you know. Because not everyone works the same in grad school. And so you want to find a mentor that also kind of clicks with your style. So a bunch of things to kind of balance and juggle around, but it's certainly doable.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of nodding to that. You have to find a mentor. I mean, how you work with the mentor matters quite a lot. So
I was gonna follow up on that, my personal opinion right now, it was not like that when I come into grad school, is that mentor fit actually, like mentor style and management style fit actually, I think, go beyond research fit. Like, sure, having a research fit will really, like, I think that sort of sets the foundation for the program to accept you, or your mentor wants to work with you in the first place. But in the long run, I think it is like, as an undergrad, I was exposed to like much more limited area of research. Like I'm interested in this thing, but I'm not sure if I'm interested in all the other things because I just like simply haven't worked with them yet. And at this point, I will say, like, in grad school, if you have a good mentor, your mentor should make you excited about that area of research. But before that, you need to find someone that you can actually work with, like talk to their grad student, like Paul said, talk to look at their mentorship record and actually get a true feeling, like ask for their red flags, honestly, to know that exactly this is the person that will be most closely working with you in the next like 5 to 6 years more than anyone else in your life. So just saying that precautions out there really have to double down on that.
Thanks. Well, I wonder if we can get to Nairobi's question. She had her hand up a little while ago, and then we have a couple additional questions in the chat after that. Nairobi?
Oh yes, sorry. Okay. So I'm more interested in pursuing a master's in like social work to become a counselor or a practitioner rather than like looking for my PhD. So I'm really interested in exploring research by obligation. So what I found that like with my personal interests are like more abstract and holistic and broader. So I'm unsure of how to apply those interests to research opportunities in a meaningful way. So specifically Paul and others that said that they're interested in like decision making. How did you choose your specific area of interest in cognitive neuroscience with moral decision making? Like, what do you find most engaging about it? How did you end up there?
Yeah, so I think I got what you're going for, but just for the sake of me clarifying, so I actually answer specifically, could you just give me like a 10-second re-summary of like your main question?
Yeah. I'm trying to find a way. My interests in research are very broad, so it's hard for me to try to find research opportunities that really fit my interests. So I'm trying to explore out with like neuroscience and cognitive. So when you said like cognitive neuroscience with moral decision making, that just sparked my interest. I was just interested to see like what do you find most engaging about that? How did you end up to that?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you find it interesting. I do too, obviously. I also, I'm gonna say struggle, but I don't mean it in a bad way. I struggle with super broad interest too. So many things interest me, and that almost goes against people's advice when you're a researcher or in grad school or something. Like people want to be super specialized and like hyper focused and an expert in one area, and that's all cool and dandy. I don't like that approach. I find that like insects are meant to specialize and humans should be kind of broadly probably good at everything, or be able to do things. So I dabble in a bunch of stuff. So while most of my stuff is broadly moral decision making and judgments, I do other things like dreams and the relationship to depression. I've done some things on like combat exposure and subjective well-being, and so I have broad interests as well. But moral stuff specifically, I mean, it's always been interesting to me as like a kid. I remember like growing up in church and asking my mom why some things were, wrong and some things were considered, fine. And it just didn't, satisfy me, the answers that I got. And so I, grew up thinking about this. And then, as you go through the world, you see good and bad things and kind of ambiguous things. And so I just kind of hyper trained me to like be more interested in it. The beautiful thing about decision making or judgments as like a broad area of research is that it touches dang near everything. So you could think of like any flavor of decision making or judgments, and something is going to be important. Like there's probably something related to what Madison does or someone else does. If you wanted to look at how people of different races make decisions about judgments about people, then that's related to people that study race. And then if you wanted to do something about economic decision making and risk and ambiguity or something like that, there's like a flavor that's related to decision making or judgment in some way. So that's why it kind of, in a roundabout way, I like that stuff specifically because so many things interest me that when new ideas pop in my brain, there's a way for me to make it related to decision making to a degree that's like reasonable, but also interesting to other people. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
No, that was actually really great, very insightful. Thank you.
Sounds kind of like a hub area. So it touches many other kind of subdisciplines, basically. We had a question in the chat a little while ago. Vicky was asking about the transition straight from undergrad to grad, and what helped those of you who did that prepare for that change.
Do you want to speak first or?
You can go medicine. No, you're good.
Yeah, so I just like came from undergrad like a year and a half ago. Definitely independent research. You should try the independent research process from start to finish before applying to grad school to make sure that you actually really like it. Um, Come up with your own question, how to answer that question. For me, I had the opportunity to write some grants and like fellowships, and so I did that as well. That has definitely been useful in my first semester as a PhD student. Definitely do an honors thesis if they have them here at Duke, I presume, so that you can get some experience with report writing and definitely try to go apply for conferences. There was this one girl in my undergrad who took her honors thesis and presented at 8 different conferences. You definitely don't need to present at 8. I think one should suffice. But there's definitely a lot of undergrads out there who are presenting at research conferences. So definitely like just taking control of your research and like the ideas and the things that you're doing is definitely extremely transferable to your PhD.
Elida?
Yeah, I think I would agree with medicine's points of, well, one conference is probably going to be good if you get to be able to do that, because I feel like, yeah, I'm thinking about, what do PIs look for when they are looking for grad student applications? And yeah, like, being involved with research, yes, like not just like, oh, like you collected data, right? But like, yeah, like doing an independent project, like coming up, like being able to generate research questions on your own and like, I guess like getting used to thinking about research from like just like a consumer of research perspective into like a producer, right? With like, how can I follow up on this? What are some of the things that I might do if I were given this task, right? Like just like being able to develop that is like important. And then yeah, being able to present. And it doesn't have to also be like a, big conference. Like if Duke has like, I know that Duke sometimes has like poster events and like, opportunities for undergrads to present, like even if it's just like an internal thing, right? It's just like good to have experience not only doing research and generating research questions and stuff, but also being able to communicate that to a larger audience. So yeah, an honors thesis definitely. And what else? I mean, I think it's also like for me personally, because I had already done 2 years, because I started as a sophomore at my lab, and then it was a good match, so I decided to like stick around, did an independent project the year after and stuff, right? But like it also is kind of like a feeling. It's gonna sound so ambiguous, but like if you feel ready, right? Like if you're confident in like, taking up this PhD journey in that way, like, if you're confident in your research skills, and obviously, like Paul said, right, like we're not expected to come to the PhD program knowing how to do every single step. Like it is like, about growth. But at the same time, yeah, like if you feel confident enough to get there and get the ball rolling with like a research project, I feel like that gives you a clue of like, oh, can I try it out now, or do I need more time, perhaps as like a lab manager or as like a paid RA, like post-bac, right, to actually grow that confidence in yourself as a researcher.
Yeah, I'll triple down and say that the honors thesis is a great way to go in terms of preparing yourself research-wise as, independent, kind of starting to be like an independent person. But outside of that, I think there are much more important things than, I mean, it's important to be able to showcase that you could think, and go through a research project. But I think the transferable skills or just skills in general that are going to like ultimately determine your success and how much fun you have and your stress levels are like really figuring out how to manage your time, like time management. If you have poor time management, you're going to have a terrible time. If you like don't stay on top of deadlines, if you're not like self-motivated, or you have a hard time kind of sticking to things in your calendar unless someone's prodding you, then that's something that would be helpful to kind of work on. And so this is going to sound, probably not what you expected, but I think the best thing you could do to prepare for grad school is like force yourself to get 8 hours of sleep a night, go exercise, an hour or so a day, stay on top of all your schooling, do some research, TA if possible at your undergrad institution or wherever you're at, like get some experience there, get some experience juggling all these kind of different demands on your time while prioritizing like your own well-being ultimately. And between now and when you go to grad school, if you could like figure out how that looks for you to like get the adequate sleep, eat properly, get some movement and exercise in your body so it feels good and you could be energized and like think right. And you could juggle some schoolwork and you could juggle some research work if that's your independent thesis, and you could juggle answering some emails and grading some stuff as a TA. Like that's essentially what the hardest part of your grad school experience is going to look like, is juggling all that. And at some point, some of those things will wash away and you won't have any more classes and you may not TA anymore. And so if you could kind of prepare yourself like, oh, this is when I am going to have the most demands on my time, I've kind of figured out a system that works for me, instead of waiting until you're in grad school and the stakes are a little higher. I think that would be a really good thing to kind of to help you. But I know that's like a little weirder to say than just like do an honors thesis. But I think if you could kind of work on that, you'll be in a good place.
Yeah, thanks for making that comment. That leads to something else I'd like to get back to, which is kind of how people's days look and so on, and how they do take care of themselves. But Sua put a question in the chat a little while ago about how many programs people applied to, how you made your application stand out. I imagine some of that was actually covered by, but not all of it was covered by things that you've been mentioning. How many did you apply to in your different areas? And how did you, was there anything else that you added aside from senior thesis, some of the recommendations that have been coming pretty reliably from you?
I did so I applied for mostly like very neuroscience based programs. I did 8, and I think the next one was John Hopkins, and I was like, it's Thanksgiving, it isn't worth it. I'm gonna have a great night, and I gave up. So I did not apply there. But I think there seems to be more and more programs that people are applying to as a general rule of thumb. I don't know why that trend is there, but I think definitely above 5, maybe closer to 10. You don't need to apply to 20 programs, but I think somewhere around there is what I've been hearing. And what make my application stand out? I'm guessing because I don't know. I guess it's a two thing. One of them is to have a very coherent story of why do I do want to do this research and why this lab fits me very well, and also where can that lead me in the future. But it doesn't like it comes to like, if especially when we're looking at neuroscience psychology, it comes a little bit trickier to mention your personal experiences or family experience in the application. Like you're not discouraged to mention it, but that it's just like a little bit complicated in terms of the wording you choose and how much percentage of your motivation only comes from that. So I guess that is a much more complicated topic, but overall you just want to show that the past research you have done and the research you want to do is connected for you as a person, like you really like this thing. So the coherency of that. And the other thing sort of linked with the last question is just to be able to ask a lot of questions. I think no one will say that you're stupid or overly confident as someone trying to get into grad school, but the capability to, when you're interviewing with someone that maybe not even is in the field you're trying to get into, be able to just like look at their abstract, listen to their research, and then ask questions that you think could be interested. I think that just often my interviews turns into a conversation with the professors about talking about their exact research, and I think that is the most enjoyable part actually for my application process. And I think that probably gives me pretty good review on the other side about just thinking scientifically and don't be shy.
I applied to 6 or 7 programs, which is on the lower side. Like I know like my PI in undergrad applied to like 15, so she was like really confused on like why I applied to so few, but I really wanted to focus on quality and not quantity. Every single one of my essays was like tailored individually to the school and the specific faculty that I was interested in. Something that I did was that like late summer, early fall, I had emailed each faculty like member that I was interested in working with. At just like a general like introduction, I asked a really simple question, are you accepting PhD students? I talked about like one or two liner of like why I think our research interests align, and then I attached my resume, and I made the executive decision not to apply to any schools to faculty who didn't respond. And I had like every other faculty member respond besides one. And that was because like I didn't want to waste money on an application when like I didn't know if they were accepting students, but B, like I was also looking for a mentor who'd be responsive to emails. If you can't just send a quick one-liner like, yep, taking students, then it's like I didn't want to like work with them. And then when I had submitted my app, I had essentially replied on that email chain, like telling them that I had applied, and I'm like, et cetera, so forth. And they would normally like respond, like, looking forward to reading your app. And like, that's how I like try to like stand out in like the application realm. And then having a really good hook is also important in your like essays and stuff like that. Because some faculty, like for CNAP, they had over 250 applications. So it's like they're reading the same sort of thing over and over and over again. I want to be a professor because, et cetera, so forth. And so my hook was like my introduction to psychology was with like the art of interrogation or something like that. Like something completely off base. Like you want to capture their attention so that they're interested in reading the rest. Yeah.
Elida?
So I ended up applying to 6 programs, but that is within the context that it was like during COVID when I applied. So, and like that was like the first year where like, all the GREs became optional, and like it was just like a weird time, right? So like I don't know how like if 6 programs was the right amount of, schools to apply to. And honestly, I think like usually the average is like 10 to 15. And I feel like the reason why that happens because like for just for like perspective, like I applied to 6 places and I heard back from 2, right? Like as in like, I got offers from 2. So like usually what happens is that because it is so competitive, like I feel like applying to 10 or 15 just like increases your likelihood that you're going to be hearing back from more places. So I think that's why people try to go for 10 to 15. So yeah, probably in hindsight, I should have applied to more as well. But COVID times. I'm like not thinking about it that much. And in terms of like what I guess makes the application stand out, I think at least like for the SOP, right? Because that's the one thing that you actually have control over in your application. Like you don't have control over your letters of rec. You don't really have control over like, other aspects of just like, oh, how is this person gonna feel about me as they're reading this, right? But then in the SOP, one thing that I try to focus on a lot is like the part where you talk about like, why you want to work with someone and how. Like I always try to like be as specific as I could. So I would usually just go and be like, oh, like, I want to work with, I don't know, like Dr. Craig, and I specifically want to like, work on this line of work that they're doing. And then how I would expand on that, like I would be like, oh, like I would love to pursue this, like follow up on it, right? And like, especially if you can frame it in a way where it's not just like, oh, I'm really interested in working with this person, and here's like what I'll do, but like how your background and your experiences can also help them. Like, it's kind of like framing it as if like, here is how I will actually be a good addition to your lab, and not just saying that you're excited about them, right? Because at the end of the day, like when the PIs are reading your statements, they're also looking into, okay, like, do I want to commit to working with this person for like 5 to 6 years, right? So like you need to pique their interest, but also like knowing what, you can how you can be an asset, I guess, for the lab and for their own work is as important, I feel like, to be able to hook them in that way. Like, especially, I don't know, if you're really good at like a specific type of methodology, like if you have like experience working with like, I don't know, like fMRI data, right? And like, oh, maybe it's a PI who's really interested in like going in that direction with their work. Like that is like something that will make you stand out, for example. But yeah. And in terms of cold emails, because I feel like that's like emailing professors. Because I also ended up like emailing people just to like let them know I was interested in like working with them and like, if we could talk more and stuff. But like usually I'd say like people are not gonna get back to you, and that is not because like, they don't like you or anything, but honestly, sometimes they just don't see it. Like I feel like even as a grad student, I feel like I get so many emails, right? But I feel like a lot of the faculty, like they get so many emails at all times that sometimes it might just like, be lost in their inbox, or like they might not have the time to respond. So like I wouldn't feel too bad if people don't get back to you, but also like, would try to put it into the perspective of just like, outside of like the formal application process, sometimes people just don't like to engage with students. So there's also like that perspective. But yeah.
And I think Paul hinted at something earlier when he said that some faculty decide they're not going to kind of respond because that kind of is another way the hidden curriculum shows up. Some students know how to play the game, others don't. And
Yeah.
so they don't want to give kind of an advantage to the ones who already know how things work, even if that's how they do work. Paul, did you have
Yeah.
anything about like schools applied to things that,
Sure.
yeah.
Sure. I applied to 10 programs, but 6 were just like for shits and giggles that I didn't really ever have a chance or like a fit at. That would just like the most absolute just shots in the dark, like Hail Mary, just to see what would happen. So don't do that, because that was like, I mean, thankfully there were like waivers, so I didn't pay anything for it, but it was still like time and energy on my part, and it just clogged up the system on their part. So I was a bit of an asshole. So really, I only applied to like 4 programs that were like for real, which is again probably from the experience of everyone else here, like on the lower end of what you should probably aim for, especially if you're able to get some like financial fee waivers or whatever the heck it is. Like then maybe somewhere between 5 and 10 might be like the sweet spot. But I cold email everybody for everything, like even outside of academia. Like I have no problem just like showing up to someone's house and like asking for something. So it's worth a shot via email. Don't show up to these people's houses, but like write them an email. If they like answer you, that's great. If not, then whatever. The person that I'm working with now, I cold emailed and he never responded. And to this day, he says he never saw it. Although I like to just, make fun of him and say that he just ignored me because he didn't think I was worth his time. But he says he didn't see it, right? These people get like literally hundreds of emails a day. And so it's very possible they don't see it, or for any reason, they don't respond. But it won't hurt you to kind of write a good email. Everyone else about how to like make their application stand out, like that's all right. That's all great. But I would also encourage, again, with kind of my non-traditional responses maybe, is I won't name drop, but not people that I work with directly, so you can't like look up these people and call them out. But some of the most well-known alive psychologists right now in the world in various fields I've like had a chance to speak with, and almost unanimously across the board, they say the number one thing that they look for in a grad student is grit. Because you could teach anyone fMRI, you could teach anyone how to collect data from kids, you could teach it, like anyone could do any of those things. Like it's not like a specific skill set that you have or don't have. Those are just like, that's just knowledge that you just kind of learn. Anyone could learn those things. But anyone can develop grit and like perseverance and persistence and things like that. But it is like a process. If you don't already have it or you're not naturally born with it, like you can develop it, but it maybe takes some more time than just learning how to use an EEG, for example. So if you could, either through your experience with your people that are writing your letters of reference, maybe you could even ask them explicitly, like, hey, if you feel comfortable and you feel like I exemplify these things, could you like emphasize in my letter, that you think I, have this grit and perseverance? Because science is like anything in life, it will wear you down, because things don't always go the way you plan, and you'll put your heart and soul into this something and it won't work. And then you have to kind of start from scratch, and it's going to suck a little bit, and that's fine. Like, own that it sucks, but you kind of have to push forward even with it sucking. And so if you could develop some of that, but also maybe highlight that, indirectly, I wouldn't say in your statement of purpose or whatever, like, I am the captain of having grit or something, but if you could like, tell it in a story and kind of show, this thing didn't work in science, and so I pivoted, adjusted, and kind of did this follow-up, and it ended up working out, something like that, that you kind of show that you have a realistic sense of what the real world is like. And it's not like, I have a question, I'm going to answer it 100% of the time on the first try with like the exact amount of resources that I think I'll need, because that's never how it's going to work out. So kind of maybe just weaving in a little bit of story, or when you do interviews or something like that, like, again, not just like throwing it down the throat, like, hi, just so you know, I like have grit, but, showcasing it in a story or an example you give would be helpful, because many people are looking for that. Because as you know, many people, for many reasons, and they're all valid, right? No judgment, but like many people that start grad school leave without completing their intended degree. So people that want to do a PhD often leave. I don't know what the new statistics are, but let's call it at least 30% maybe. Not specifically Duke or not specifically psychology, but let's say across the board grad programs, at least 30% probably like decide that they don't want to finish it. And so that's like a huge cost to people. And so if they get a better sense than not that you're able to kind of push through, then you're a more attractive applicant to them.
Thanks for sharing. All great advice. I do have one question for you, and then I'll go back to comments. How many of you came in with an NSF? So, graduate fellowship program or graduate research fellowship program, because sometimes you can apply for grants as you're applying to grad school, and that can make you a more attractive candidate because that subtracts by an order of tens of thousands of dollars from the cost of the mentor would have to, cover you.
Yeah, so I don't think you'll know if you've been awarded it by the time grad school applications come out, like it's like at the same time or after. And so all you could say is that, hey, I did apply to these things, and so it's possible. And even if you don't get it, the fact that you are already thinking about that, like, shows people that you understand kind of this important part of how academia works, and that you're able to put together a coherent thing, and you're able to kind of see something to completion, even though it's not like a full project, like going through the act of applying for these fellowships and grants are great, because maybe you do get it and then, your advisor is going to love you forever. Or, you kind of, you signal that, and you're like a thoughtful, growing academic, and the things that you ought to do. But I don't think that they'll know if you have it at that time, because the times like coincide with each other or something like that. But that's a great.
Well, I would encourage all the people who are attending to kind of look into that NSF GRFP and just check out the website, and it's just good to know about that. So a couple other things that came through here. I think that Nairobi asked a little while ago about whether it's worthwhile to attend conferences even without presenting research as an undergrad. What do y'all think?
I mean, I'd say if you have the funding for it, definitely go for it. Because my undergrad institution didn't really have, like, you have to present it, like if you're going to a conference for it to be reimbursed. And I think this also, like in terms of your earlier question, Nairobi, like it would help you, like going to conferences is a way to figure out what you're interested in and trying to narrow that down. Because like, you get to go to like so many talks and hear about all the new research that's being done in the field. It also could help you like figure out, like, you maybe, I don't know, listen to someone's talk and you really like their research, or like you really like their personality, and like that might give you a sense of like, oh, I might want to work with this person, right? Like, so it can help in terms of both like networking and like meeting new people who are doing research, but also just like honing your own interests, and also like introducing yourself to like people, especially if you're like interested in going to grad school.
Other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'd say go if it's free and convenient enough, because you know there's limited time and like energy in your life, and so there may be something else that you could be doing, maybe in preparation for grad school, but also just in like life that you enjoy that is like a better use of your time. And it also, there's a caveat, like if it is a conference related to the thing that you're interested in, then more points for that. Like if it's just a random, I know you mentioned, social work. If this is a psychology conference on human AI interaction, I mean, you might get something out just to kind of see how conferences work and like this is like the general kind of feel of it. But you're not going to be kind of expanding your network, which is one of the most important things of like the of conferences. Like had like total transparency. When I go to conferences, I skip 95% of the talks and I like do my own work in my room. And then when it comes time to network, I like talk with people and go to posters and stuff. And that has like been exponentially kind of better for me than that. So anyway, if you think that it's possible to network and maybe get yourself a foot in the door at a grad program or a job or internship afterwards in social working because it's related to what you do, then I'd say yes, it might be more worthwhile. But if it costs anything and it is in something totally different from what you ever want to do, then ultimately it's your call. But there's probably better things that you could be doing with your time, if that makes sense.
Okay, another question about personal statements. So just so you know, Tina Williams did address this. She said that the statement that you write for undergrad is going to be very different. The statement you write for grad is going to be very different from the statement you might have written for undergrad. And kind of what did that look like for you? Was that true for you?
Yeah, so if I remember correctly, like when you're applying for like colleges, you have an ability to like respond to like 6 or 7 different prompts. You're reflecting on like life story or something that excites you or whatever. Um, you're gonna have in like PhD applications a statement of purpose and then like a personal history, something like some sort of like history, personal statement. So you have 2 statements. Your SOP is going to be essentially like why you're doing the things that you want to do, like why you want to go into research, why you want to get a PhD, and like what you have done before that, like your research experiences and the story of like essentially leading you up to like attaining your PhD and why you want to attend that school. So it's just like your research statement. And then you have like a personal history statement, which is a lot shorter. So this is like 250 words to 500 words. And it essentially talks about your life story and any adversity you might have faced, or how you want to like combat challenges in academia, by like joining, for example, here in Duke, like the anti-racism community. Um, so yeah, there's like 2 statements that you write instead of the one, and you're answering like 2 very different prompts than like a general thing that you write in like undergrad.
Other thoughts on this?
I feel like when I think back, I can remember almost every single sentence I put in my SOP. I cannot remember what I wrote for my personal statement at all. This is gonna sound awful, I think, but I feel like as if you're applying for a job. Like the PI or the program certainly wants you to be like a better person and wants you to be where you are. But what they also want is that someone who can really contribute to this community. And that goes beyond research. That also goes into, for example, the anti-racism community we have here in PNN or, teaching and all those kind of things you want to do in life. But it's still centered around your identity as a soon-to-be grad student. So research definitely plays a big part. So I feel like the way I approach it and the 2 advice I guess my undergrad mentor gave me when he was reading my SOP is that First, cut off all the flowery languages. Like, no one cares if you are feeling the breeze on your face at one specific morning where you're getting coffee and you want to do grad school. You want to get to the point. You want to make sure every sentence you're saying is conveying a central message of either your personality or your interest or motivation or your fit for the program, something like that. So write it with very intentionally. And I guess the second thing is that just to um I guess personal statement will be super tricky, but sort of like twisted still in terms of contributing to your research. Twist that in terms of like, mentorship that you can give or, like I'm guessing like transferable skill you want to get for your future job, things like that. So yeah, make it like a job application, make something intentional, after read it out loud as if you are someone who is looking for a grad student. And I think that can really brings out the usefulness of both of these statements, I guess.
Great advice.
Yeah, and in terms of like I guess like a concrete outline, if that helps people for SOPs, like you usually start like really briefly, right, about like why you want to do what you want to do, right? And then you kind of get more into like, your so far your experience as a researcher. So like, all of the projects that you worked on and, the skills that you gained from that. And then the last parts end up being like, specific to the institution, right? So like, who I want to work with and why I want to work with that person and how, what will I be bringing to the table, what I am expecting to get back kind of thing. So, and like, I guess it's like, yeah, I think, I don't know, we still sometimes call them personal statements, but I feel like it's like, not actually personal enough to be called that, right? Like I feel like personal stuff only ends up, I think, making the cut to into like an SOP if it somehow relates to the research, right? Like usually, and that's I think the biggest difference with I think college applications, like it is, they're trying to get an understanding of you as a person, right, when you're applying. But then with the SOPs for like PhD programs, it's really about knowing you as a researcher. So what have you done? What do you want to do? And how can you actually do it?
Well, we are nearing the last bit of our panel, the time set aside for the panel. I do want to mention, I'm glad that some of you mentioned the anti-racism community because I was given a flyer that I'm going to send to all the people who attended tonight to attend the virtual office hours that you all are putting on. So just so you know, if you're applying to a program, it doesn't have to be at Duke. If it's a psychology program, you can get help from I'm trying to read it, but I think it's, yeah, PhD students, postdocs, and faculty to help you with your statement and other aspects of application. Are any of you taking part in that or going to be offering your help as part of that? Okay. Yeah, so I'll send that out to everyone. There's a link where you can kind of sign up for a time. So it's a one-on-one kind of situation. But panelists, thank you so much for giving your time tonight. People who are attending, especially the people who are long haulers, I think there's a few people who've been here for the whole 2 hours. Kudos. Hopefully you learned a lot about the or grad school application process and things to think on as you're mulling this decision over. And hopefully it ends up being of benefit. But everyone, thank you so much for attending tonight. I hope you have a lovely evening after this. Okay. Thanks.